This meeting is about a condemned building, nothing more. Martin Vale stood before the town council, calm as polished glass. Nathan sat in the front row with Atlas at his feet and a cardboard box beside him. Evelyn whispered, "Once we play that tape, there's no going back." Nathan looked at the people behind him. Tired faces, folded hands, years of being ignored. "Good," he said. The chairman sighed. "Mr. Cole, do you have evidence or just emotion?" Nathan stood. Atlas stood with him. 6 minutes later, no one in Mercy Ridge would ever call that police station abandoned again. When a man leaves the service, they hand him a folder thick with forms, phone numbers, benefit codes, and polite words that sound like doors closing softly. When Nathan Cole came home, they thanked him for his service, shook his hand, and sent him into a country that suddenly felt too wide, too bright, and too busy to notice he was still standing there. For months, he carried that folder in the back seat of his old Ford Ranger beside a toolbox, 2 faded uniforms, and a German shepherd named Atlas who understood silence better than most people understood speech. Nathan was 42, though some mornings the mirror gave him 50. His face had the weathered calm of a man who had spent years solving practical problems under impossible laws. Broken generators, washed-out roads, bridges split by floodwater, roofs peeled back by storms. In the Army Corps of Engineers, he had been the man people called when something had to stand again. Now he lived in a weekly motel outside Knoxville, Tennessee, where the carpet smelled faintly of bleach and rain, and the neon sign buzzed all night like an insect that refused to die. Atlas slept by the door, one ear always lifted. Even retired, even gray around the muzzle, the shepherd kept watch as if duty were not a job but a bone buried too deep to dig out. That Tuesday morning, Nathan sat in a county veterans assistance office with Atlas at his boots and a paper cup of coffee cooling untouched in his hand. Across from him, a case coordinator named Denise Holloway tapped at her keyboard with the careful softness of someone who had delivered bad news too often to hurry it. "Mr. Cole," she said, not unkindly, "your housing extension was denied, I'm sorry." Nathan nodded once. He had learned that a man could lose a great deal without making a sound. "There may be another program opening next month," she added, sliding a packet toward him. Another packet, another list of numbers that rang into voicemail, another map with circles drawn around places already full. Nathan looked down at Atlas, who rested his chin on one paw but kept his amber eyes open. "Next month," Nathan repeated, and the words came out hollow, like dropping a coin into an empty well. Denise hesitated. Then she reached into a side drawer and pulled out an envelope the color of old bone. "This came in for you through the county clerk's office. It was forwarded twice. I almost missed it." Nathan stared at his name typed across the front, Nathaniel James Cole. Below it in smaller print was the name of a town he had not spoken aloud in 23 years, Mercy Ridge. The envelope felt brittle between his fingers, as if it had been waiting longer than paper should have to wait. Inside was a folded legal notice, a photocopied deed, and a small brass key taped to the corner with yellowing adhesive. The key was heavy, tarnished, and strangely warm from his hand. Nathan read the first line, then the second. Then he stopped breathing for a moment. Denise leaned forward. "Is everything all right?" He did not answer right away. The document said his father, Grace Cole, deceased 6 years now, had purchased abandoned municipal property under a county reclamation program. The property, former Mercy Ridge Police Station, 19 Alder Street. Purchase price, $10. Transfer to Nathaniel James Cole upon verified claim of inheritance. Required physical possession within 72 hours of notice. Failure to appear or demonstrate intent to restore or reside would return the property to the town for redevelopment review. $10. A police station. His father had left him a police station. Nathan almost laughed, but the sound caught somewhere behind his ribs and turned into something closer to pain. He and his father had spent their last years like 2 radios tuned 1 click apart, close enough for static, never clear enough for music. Grace Cole had been an electrician, a stubborn man with hands scarred by honest work and a heart he kept locked behind practical sentences. Check your oil. Pay your bills. Don't leave tools in the rain. That was how he said love, if he said it at all. Nathan looked again at the key. Atlas lifted his head. The shepherd's nose twitched. Then he stood, slow and deliberate, and pressed his shoulder against Nathan's knee, not pushing, anchoring. Denise lowered her voice. "There's one more thing. A development company filed interest in that block last month. Brighton Land Group. If you don't claim it, they likely will. Nathan folded the papers carefully. Outside the office window, morning traffic moved under a pale September sun. People drove to jobs, appointments, grocery stores, ordinary lives with ordinary destinations. Nathan had no destination an hour ago. Now he had 72 hours, $38 in his checking account, half a tank of gas, one old dog, and a key to a town he had spent half his life trying not to remember. He stood and the chair legs scraped softly against the floor. Denise looked up at him with something like worry. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight, Mr. Cole?" Nathan slipped the key into his pocket. It landed against his leg with a small, certain weight. For the first time in months, the answer did not feel like a lie. "Mercy Ridge," he said. Atlas moved toward the door before Nathan did, as if the old shepherd had heard a call buried inside the metal. Nathan left the veteran's office with the envelope tucked inside his jacket and the brass key in his pocket, its weight tapping against his thigh with every step like a second heartbeat. The parking lot smelled of warm asphalt, cut grass, and the faint oil leak beneath his Ford Ranger. It was a tired blue truck with a cracked dashboard, two mismatched tires, and a passenger seat worn smooth by Atlas's body over the years. Nathan stood beside it for a moment, one hand on the door handle, watching traffic slide past on the road beyond the lot. Knoxville moved like nothing had happened. A delivery van turned left. A woman in scrubs crossed the street with coffee in one hand. A man laughed into his phone near the bus stop. The whole world kept going, and Nathan hated how often that surprised him. Atlas nudged his knee. "Yeah," Nathan murmured. "I know." He opened the passenger door and the old German shepherd climbed in carefully, favoring his right hip but refusing help as always. Pride, Nathan thought, was not a human flaw. Sometimes it had four legs and gray fur around the muzzle. He got behind the wheel, counted the cash in his wallet, then checked the gauge. Half a tank, maybe enough if he drove easy. Not enough if the truck decided to complain. He stopped first at a gas station on the edge of town, bought $20 of fuel, one black coffee, and a small bag of dog food that cost more than he wanted it to. The clerk called him Sir without looking up. Nathan almost smiled at that. Sir was a word people used when they did not know what else to see. On the highway south, the city thinned into warehouses, then fields, then long stretches of road lined with cedar and pine. September lay over Tennessee like a hand not quite ready to let go of summer. The air shimmered above the pavement. Kudzu climbed fences in thick green waves. Farmhouses appeared and vanished behind stands of oak. Every few miles, a church sign offered salvation in black plastic letters, some missing, some crooked, all of them trying. Atlas sat upright, nose lifted to the cracked window, drinking in the country air as if it carried messages Nathan could not read. Mercy Ridge was 3 hours away, maybe 4 with the truck's mood. Nathan had not been back since he was 19. Back then he left with a duffel bag, a scholarship to a trade program, and a heart full of things he was too proud to say. His father had stood on the porch that morning in work boots and an undershirt, holding a coffee mug like it was the only object keeping his hands busy. "Check your coolant before Chattanooga," Grace Cole had said. Not "I'll miss you," not "be careful," not "come home when you can," just coolant. Nathan had taken it as coldness then. Now at 42, he understood men sometimes passed love through the only tools they trusted. Oil wires, weather stripping, paid taxes on an abandoned building no one else wanted. The thought made his throat tighten, and he reached for the radio just to fill the truck with something other than memory. Static first, then an old country station fading in and out. A woman sang about leaving home and finding it too late. Nathan turned it down. "Too on the nose," he told Atlas. The dog flicked one ear but kept watching the road. Somewhere past Sweetwater, the Ranger began to rattle under the hood. Nathan pulled onto the shoulder, dust blooming around the tires, and sat there with both hands on the wheel. For one sharp second, the old emptiness opened inside him. The kind that said, of course the road ends here. Of course hope was only another thing that needed parts you couldn't afford. Atlas stepped awkwardly across the bench seat and pressed his head under Nathan's hand. Not dramatic, not needy, just there. Nathan exhaled slowly, popped the hood, and found the loose clamp in less than 2 minutes. A simple fix, almost embarrassing. He tightened it with a screwdriver from the glove box while sweat gathered at the back of his neck and cicadas buzzed in the weeds like electrical wires. When he climbed back in, Atlas looked at him with those steady amber eyes, the same look he used to give before searching a collapsed road or entering a damaged building. Ready when you are. Nathan started the engine. It held. By late afternoon, the land began to rise and fold into softer hills. The signs grew older, the gas stations grew farther apart. Then, just as the sun slipped low and copper-colored behind the trees, Nathan saw it, Mercy Ridge, Pop, Fort 812. The sign was faded, its white paint weathered to gray, but someone had planted marigolds around the post. That small act of care unsettled him more than decay would have. He slowed the truck. Atlas stood, front paws braced, nose working hard. Nathan drove past a closed textile mill, a feed store with a tin roof, a barbershop striped pole turning lazily, though no one sat inside. At the town square, an American flag lifted and fell in the warm evening air. Nothing looked the way he remembered, and everything did. His father's town, his almost home, his unfinished sentence. Nathan touched the key through his jacket. "All right," he said softly, though he was not sure whether he was speaking to Atlas, his father, or the frightened part of himself that still wanted to turn around. "Let's see what $10 bought us." The old police station sat at 19 Alder Street, as if Mercy Ridge had not abandoned it all at once, but slowly, year by year, like a man forgetting the name of someone he once loved. Nathan found it just off the square, between a shuttered pharmacy with sun-faded posters in the windows, and a gravel lot where weeds had grown tall enough to lean against the bumpers of forgotten cars. The building was 2 stories of tired red brick, its mortar cracked in pale crooked lines, its front steps split down the middle by a stubborn ribbon of crabgrass. Above the entrance, a metal sign still clung to the wall, though half the letters had surrendered to weather. Mercy Ridge Police Department, it read, if a person was willing to fill in what time had taken. Nathan shut off the truck. The engine clicked and sighed under the hood. For a long moment he did not move. He had expected ugly. He had expected useless. But he had not expected this strange ache in his chest, this feeling that the building had been waiting with its shoulders hunched, embarrassed to be seen in such condition. Atlas stood on the passenger seat, nose pressed near the cracked window, breathing in short, focused pulls. His ears lifted, not alarm, not fear, recognition almost. Nathan opened the door, and heat rolled up from the street. It was late September, but the South held summer in its teeth long after the calendar said let go. The air smelled of dust, dry leaves, old oil, and somewhere nearby, coffee drifting from a diner kitchen. Nathan walked to the sidewalk with the envelope in one hand and the brass key in the other. The key looked too small for what it promised. Atlas climbed down carefully, shook himself once, then moved ahead of Nathan toward the front steps. "Easy," Nathan said. The dog did not look back. He placed one paw on the first cracked step, then another as solemn as a church usher. Nathan followed, feeling ridiculous and exposed. A grown man standing in front of a dead police station with $38, a retired working dog, and a deed that sounded like a joke told by a cruel universe. The front door was heavier than he expected, dark wood reinforced with old steel. Someone had painted it black years ago, but the paint had blistered and peeled, revealing brown grain underneath. Nathan slid the key into the lock. At first, nothing happened. He jiggled it once. Twice, the lock resisted with the stubbornness of old grief. Then something inside gave a dry metallic click. The sound went through him, not loud, not dramatic, but final. The door opened with a long groan. Dust breathed out from the darkness. Atlas entered first. Nathan stepped in behind him and lifted his flashlight. The beam cut across a front lobby frozen in another life, a service counter with chipped varnish, 2 wooden benches, a bulletin board holding curled notices from years past, and a flag in the corner wrapped in a thin gray veil of dust. The air inside was warm, stale, and faintly metallic, like pennies held too long in a fist. Nathan's boots stirred grit on the tile. Somewhere above, water dripped with patient insistence. Atlas moved through the lobby slowly, nose low, tail steady. He paused at the counter, sniffed beneath it, then continued toward the hallway. Nathan found the old holding cells in back, their doors open, the bars rusted but intact. He found a records room with cabinets standing like silent witnesses. He found a break room where a calendar from 2018 still hung beside a sink stained brown from mineral water. Every room seemed to be holding its breath. Then Atlas stopped at a gray metal door marked Chief Office. He did not scratch. He did not bark. He simply sat and looked at Nathan. "You think that's where the $10 tour ends?" Nathan asked quietly. The door was unlocked. Inside, afternoon light slipped through cracked blinds and fell in narrow gold stripes across a desk, a filing cabinet, and an old electrical panel mounted crooked on the wall. Nathan stepped toward it out of habit. Wiring always told the truth. He opened the panel and found tucked behind a bundle of labeled lines a sealed envelope with his name written by hand, his father's hand. Nathan knew it before his mind accepted it. The letters were blocky, practical, pressed hard into the paper as if Grace Cole had been wiring the words into place. Nathan opened it with fingers that had suddenly lost their steadiness. Inside were 5 $20 bills, a receipt for 3 years of prepaid property taxes, and a note written on yellow legal paper. "Son, I couldn't give you much, but I tried to leave you a place no one could take from you." Nathan read it once, then again. The room blurred, not with tears exactly, but with the pressure of things held too long behind the eyes. He sat in the chair behind the desk, the same chair where some forgotten chief had once taken complaints, signed reports, decided what mattered. Atlas came to him and rested his muzzle on Nathan's knee. Outside, a truck passed on Alder Street, its tires whispering over the pavement. Inside, for the first time in years, Nathan felt the faint outline of a word he did not trust yet. Home. Nathan might have spent the whole evening inside that office, letting his father's note burn a quiet hole through every old resentment he had carried for years, if Atlas had not walked to the front lobby and given one low whine toward the street. Not a warning, a reminder. The kind of sound he made when Nathan had forgotten to eat, forgotten to sleep, forgotten that a body was not built to live on memory alone. Nathan folded the note carefully and placed it back in the envelope, except for the tax receipt which he slipped into his jacket. "All right," he said, his voice rougher than he wanted it to be. "Food first, existential crisis after." Atlas accepted this plan with a slow blink. The diner Nathan had smelled earlier sat 2 blocks down from the station, beneath a blue metal sign shaped like a lantern. The Blue Lantern Cafe looked like the sort of place that had survived not because business was good, but because the town had never figured out how to be without it. Its windows glowed honey yellow against the dimming street. A bell over the door gave a tired jingle. When Nathan stepped inside, Atlas close to his leg. Conversation softened, not stopped, but bent slightly around him. That was small-town attention, quiet enough to be polite, sharp enough to cut. A woman behind the counter looked up from filling a coffee pot. She was somewhere in her late 60s, with silver hair pinned back, brown eyes that missed nothing, and forearms strong from a lifetime of carrying plates, grief, and other people's business. Her name tag read Ruth. Her gaze moved from Nathan's face to Atlas, then to the envelope tucked beneath his arm. Something in her expression changed. "You're Grace Cole's boy," she said. Nathan had not been called anyone's boy in more than 20 years. He felt the words land in a tender place. "Nathan," he answered. "Yes, Mom." Ruth set the coffee pot down with care. "Well," she said, almost to herself, "I wondered if that key would ever find you." She waved toward a booth near the window. "Sit. Dog can come in if he behaves better than most men." Atlas walked to the booth and settled beneath it with the dignity of a retired judge. Nathan sat facing the street, where the old police station was just visible in the purple edge of evening. Ruth brought coffee without asking, then a plate of meatloaf, green beans and mashed potatoes thick with pepper gravy. "I didn't order this," Nathan said. "No," she replied. "You looked like a man who wouldn't." That silenced him more effectively than pity would have. He picked up his fork and took a bite. The food was ordinary, warm, and almost unbearable. For a few minutes, Ruth let him eat. Then she leaned one hip against the empty side of the booth and nodded toward the station. "Your daddy kept the lights running in that place long after the town stopped paying bills on time. Fixed half the wiring himself. Wouldn't take more than $10 for most jobs." Nathan looked up. "He bought it for 10. That sounds like Grace." "Why?" Ruth's face tightened. Not with fear exactly, but with the old caution of someone who had learned that truth had weather. "Because he believed buildings remember what people try to forget." Outside, a pickup rolled past slowly, its driver glancing toward the cafe windows. Ruth noticed but kept her voice level. That station wasn't always a wreck. Once upon a time, folks came there when they had nowhere else to go. Not just for crime, for help, a lost paycheck, a shutoff notice, a neighbor gone quiet too long. Sheriff Harold Parker had a habit of treating poor people like they still had names. Nathan absorbed that. The phrase stayed with him, like they still had names. Ruth continued. Then things changed, the mill closed. People started getting sick near Alder Creek. Wells went bad, land got cheap. Men in pressed shirts came around talking about progress. Brighton? Nathan asked. Ruth gave a humorless smile. Brighton is the new label on an old bottle. Atlas lifted his head under the table. Ruth glanced down at him. Smart dog. Nathan's fingers tightened around his coffee mug. My father knew something? Your father knew wires, water pumps, breaker boxes, and when men were lying through their teeth. That was enough. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded notice. Town office posted this yesterday. Saw your name on the deed transfer list. Figured you'd come through here sooner or later. Nathan unfolded it. The language was clean, official, and bloodless. The property at 19 Alder Street had been flagged for structural review. Owner must submit restoration intent within 30 days. Failure to comply may result in condemnation and redevelopment release. Nathan felt the old familiar trap close in. Deadline. Paperwork, money he did not have. Ruth watched him read it. People don't fight over worthless buildings, Nathan. Her voice softened, but did not weaken. If somebody wants that place gone this badly, it means something inside it still matters. He looked across the street at the dark shape of the station. For the first time, it did not look empty. It looked guarded, waiting. Atlas crawled out from beneath the booth and placed his head against Nathan's knee, facing the same direction. Nathan set the notice beside his plate. He had come to claim shelter. Somehow shelter had become a question, and Mercy Ridge, with its polite smiles and buried stories, was asking whether he still remembered how to stand for something. That first night inside the station did not feel like sleep. It felt like waiting. Nathan had bought 2 bottles of water, a pack of crackers, and a can of dog food from the small market near the square before returning to 19 Alder Street, where the building stood under the warm dark like a witness unwilling to leave the stand. He parked behind it, carried in his bedroll, a flashlight, his toolbox, and the kind of stubbornness men mistake for courage when they do not have anything else left. The power was unreliable. One hallway light flickered when he found the main breaker, throwing pale yellow spasms across the lobby tile. The plumbing coughed but gave no water. Somewhere in the walls, an old pipe ticked as the building cooled. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the trees, their sound rising and falling like 1,000 tiny machines trying to keep summer alive. Nathan spread his bedroll on the floor of the chief's office, beneath the cracked blinds and beside the desk where he had found his father's note. He placed the envelope in the top drawer, then changed his mind and put it under his jacket instead. Some things did not belong in drawers. Atlas ate slowly from an old metal bowl Nathan had rinsed with bottled water, then walked the perimeter of the room twice before settling near the door. Nathan watched him with a tired half-smile. Inspection passed? Atlas gave no answer. He stared into the hallway. Nathan leaned back against the desk, boots crossed, eyes on the ceiling stains. His father's words kept returning, not as comfort exactly, but as an ache with edges. I tried to leave you a place no one could take from you. Nathan had spent years believing Grace Cole gave him little because he felt little. Now the old man's silence had begun rearranging itself into something else, and Nathan did not know where to put the guilt. Close to midnight, Atlas stood. No sound, no sudden movement, just a clean, deliberate rise that pulled Nathan from the shallow edge of sleep. What is it? Nathan whispered, though he already knew the dog's posture. Alert, focused, working. Atlas stepped into the hallway and moved past the records room toward the rear storage area. Nathan grabbed the flashlight and followed. The beam caught dust floating in the air, file cabinets with rusted handles, a broken chair turned on its side, cardboard boxes sagging from humidity. Atlas stopped at the back wall. It was paneled with cheap plywood, painted the same dull beige as everything else. But the dog lowered his nose to the baseboard and inhaled sharply. Then he scratched once at the floor, not frantic, precise. Nathan crouched beside him. Mold? Atlas sniffed again, then looked at him. Nathan ran the flashlight along the wall. At first, he saw nothing but peeling paint and old watermarks. Then the beam caught a seam too straight to be accidental. He traced it with his fingers, a hidden frame. The panel had been painted over, caulked at the edges, disguised by a metal shelving unit someone had bolted in front of it years ago. Nathan's pulse shifted. He went back for his toolbox. The work steadied him. Screws came loose one by one. The shelving unit groaned away from the wall, leaving dark rectangles in the paint where it had blocked the dust. Behind it was a narrow door, no knob, only a recessed latch packed with grime. Nathan cleaned it with the tip of a screwdriver. Atlas sat beside him, eyes bright in the flashlight glow. "You found this," Nathan said softly. The latch resisted, then released with a dry pop. The door opened inward to a stairwell that swallowed the light. Cool air breathed up from below, carrying the smell of damp concrete, paper, and something faintly chemical, sharp enough to make Nathan pause. Atlas leaned forward but did not descend until Nathan did. The stairs were narrow, built more like an afterthought than a planned entrance. At the bottom was a small room Nathan had not seen on any visible layout. Concrete walls, low ceiling, a work table, 2 metal cabinets, and a fireproof safe no larger than a footlocker. Dust lay thick over everything except the floor near the cabinets, where faint scrape marks showed someone had once moved them in a hurry. Nathan opened the first cabinet. Inside were sealed glass jars labeled by date, each holding soil or cloudy water. The second cabinet held folders wrapped in plastic, maps of Alder Creek, maintenance reports, photocopied letters, and a cassette recorder with 3 tapes rubber-banded together. On the top folder, written in black marker, were the words, Alder Creek Sendent, 2018. Nathan felt the room contract around him. Not danger, not exactly. Something heavier, the presence of people who had tried to speak and been filed away instead. He picked up the recorder, checked the batteries, and pressed play. Static hissed. Then an older man's voice emerged, thin but steady. "This is Harold Parker, former sheriff of Mercy Ridge. If anyone finds this, understand one thing first. We were not trying to save a building. We were trying to save the people the town had taught itself not to see." Nathan stopped breathing. Atlas stood so close, his shoulder touched Nathan's leg. The old dog did not look at the tapes or the maps. He looked at Nathan, as if waiting for the man to understand that some calls for help do not come through radios, phones, or open doors. Some wait in the walls for years, until the right hand finds the latch. Nathan played the tape twice before he trusted himself to move. The first time he heard only the voice, Harold Parker, dry with age and strain, speaking carefully, as if each word had to cross a room full of people waiting to deny it. The second time, he heard what lived beneath it, shame, not guilt for doing wrong, but the deeper kind that comes from knowing you told the truth and watched decent people look away because looking was expensive. Atlas lay at the foot of the work table, head raised, amber eyes following Nathan from cabinet to cabinet as the flashlight beam moved across maps, labels, dates, and brittle file folders. Alder Creek was not much on paper, just a thin blue line bending around the eastern edge of Mercy Ridge before feeding into the smaller wells near the old mill road. But on Harold Parker's map, that blue line had become a wound. Red circles marked well sites, yellow tabs marked complaints. Black X's marked properties later purchased by holding companies with names so clean they sounded washed. Ridgeway Renewal, South Lantern Assets, County Line Partners. Nathan knew enough about construction, drainage, and soil movement to feel the pattern before he fully understood it. Water did not respect property lines. Chemicals did not stop at fences because lawyers asked nicely. He opened the folder labeled 2018 and found photographs of stained sink basins, copies of lab requests, handwritten notes from residents who said their water smelled like metal after heavy rain. There were maintenance logs from the closed textile mill, disposal receipts with missing addresses, and letters sent to county offices that had been stamped received, then apparently buried under silence. One note, written by Grace Cole in block letters, stopped Nathan cold. Pump at lot 12 replaced again. Filter black after 9 days. Mrs. Bell says water tastes bitter, not rust, not normal, asked Harold. Nathan sat slowly on the metal chair. The room seemed smaller than before. His father had not been chasing ghosts. He had been following wires, pumps, filters, the plain evidence of things that failed when people lied about them. The tape continued. "The first mistake," Sheriff Parker said, "was thinking the town would listen because the facts were clear. Facts don't stand a chance when fear has already taken a seat at the table. Nathan looked at the jars of cloudy water lined in the cabinet. Each label carried a date, a road, sometimes a name. Retired mill workers, widowed homeowners, men living out of trailers while they repaired other people's roofs, women cleaning rooms at the highway motel. Veterans who had come home to cheap land because cheap was all that was left. Not statistics, not debris. People. Nathan felt a pressure behind his sternum, quiet and hard. In the service, a damaged bridge was never just a damaged bridge. It was the route to medicine, fuel, shelter, evacuation, morning coffee, one more day of normal life. Infrastructure was dignity made visible. Water was not a luxury. A working door was not a luxury. A safe floor, a sound roof, a place where someone answered when you knocked, none of that was charity. It was the minimum promise people made when they decided to live near one another. He opened his father's notebook. Most pages were practical. Breaker labels, pipe measurements, costs of fuses, names of people who owed him nothing because Grace had crossed the amounts out. Near the back, the handwriting changed. The lines pressed deeper. They call them holdouts. They call them low-income parcels. They call the station obsolete. Don't let them call people debris. Nathan read that sentence until it blurred. Debris was what crews cleared after storms. Debris had no birthday, no favorite diner booth, no hands that shook when signing forms, no dog waiting under a table, no father leaving keys behind because he did not know how else to say stay alive. Atlas rose and came beside him, leaning his warm shoulder into Nathan's leg. Nathan rested one hand on the dog's head. He knew, he whispered. My old man knew. Above them, the station creaked in the night heat, tired but standing. Nathan gathered the maps and tapes into a clean box, not because he knew what to do next, but because he understood what he could no longer do. He could no longer pretend this building was only shelter. It was testimony. It was memory with brick walls. It was a question asked by the dead on behalf of the living. When people become inconvenient, do they stop being worth protecting? Nathan looked at Atlas, and the old shepherd looked back with the calm certainty of a creature that had never needed a policy to recognize a person in need. For the first time since arriving in Mercy Ridge, Nathan did not feel like a man who had inherited a problem. He felt like a man who had been handed a responsibility. By morning, the hidden room had changed the way Nathan heard the building. The drips were no longer just plumbing. The groans in the walls were no longer just old timber settling in humid air. Every sound seemed attached to a name, a date, a complaint that had been stamped received and then set aside until paper became dust. Nathan carried the box of files upstairs just after sunrise, Atlas climbing slowly behind him, each step careful but determined. The lobby looked softer in the early light. Dust floated through gold beams. The old flag in the corner hung still. Nathan set the box on the front counter and stood there with both hands braced against the wood, feeling the weight of a question too large for one man and one dog. Ruth Bell opened the door before 8, holding 2 coffees and a paper sack warm with biscuits. She did not ask why Nathan looked as if he had aged 10 years overnight. She simply placed the food on the counter, looked at the box and said, "So Grace left the door where a good dog could find it." Nathan almost laughed. Almost. "I need someone who understands records, law, town filings." Ruth nodded as if she had been expecting this from the moment he walked into her cafe. "Then you need Evelyn Parker." The name tightened the room. Sheriff Harold Parker's daughter lived 3 streets over in a white house with green shutters, and a front porch swept clean enough to make visitors stand straighter. Evelyn Parker was 45, a local attorney with careful eyes and the kind of composure people build when grief has made them tired of explaining themselves. She opened the door only halfway when Nathan knocked. Atlas stood beside him, calm as a promise. "Mrs. Parker," Nathan said. "Evelyn," she corrected. Her gaze dropped to the banker's box in his arms, then to Atlas, then back to Nathan. Ruth called. That was all the welcome he got. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. Nathan laid the first folder on her kitchen table. Evelyn remained standing, arms folded. "My father spent the last year of his career being called unstable," she said. "After that, people only wanted to discuss him in whispers or not at all. So before you ask me to reopen anything, understand something. I buried this once." Nathan heard no anger in her voice. Anger would have been easier. This was exhaustion, packed carefully and stored for years. I'm not asking you to believe me, he said. I'm asking you to look. Atlas, as if sensing the thin ice beneath every word, walked to the far side of the room and lay down beside an old wooden desk. Evelyn turned toward him, her face changed. Not much, just a soft break around the eyes. That was my father's desk, she said. Atlas rested his chin on his paws, exactly as if he had been told to wait there. Evelyn looked away quickly, but not before Nathan saw the past move through her. She sat. 1 folder became 3. 3 became 7. The morning stretched. Evelyn read lab notes, tax transfers, water complaints, corporate filings, and the handwritten pages from Grace Cole's notebook. Her posture changed slowly from guarded to intent. She began taking notes on a yellow legal pad, drawing lines between company names, dates, parcels, and town votes. By noon, she had stopped blinking so often. Some of this can be challenged, she said at last. Her voice was low, not all of it, but enough. The samples would need current testing. The recordings need authentication. The property condemnation can be delayed if the building is tied to an active environmental inquiry. Nathan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. So it matters? Evelyn looked at him then, really looked. Mr. Cole, if these documents are what they appear to be, your father and mine were trying to preserve evidence of a pattern, not one mistake, a pattern. Ruth began making calls before Nathan left the driveway. By late afternoon, people started appearing at the station in 1s and 2s. A retired carpenter named Walt Briggs brought a ladder and said the front steps were a lawsuit waiting to happen. A former Navy mechanic named Joanne Tate showed up with work gloves and a bad knee she refused to mention. A widowed nurse, Alma Reed, brought cleaning supplies and quietly began washing the lobby windows. No one made speeches. No one called it a movement. They just arrived, looked around at the tired old building, and found something that needed doing. Nathan watched them from the chief's office doorway, stunned by the ordinary holiness of it. A screw tightened. A window opened. A broom pushed dust toward the light. Atlas moved among them like an old supervisor, accepting gentle pats, inspecting toolboxes, settling wherever the work seemed most important. By sunset, the front door closed properly for the first time in years. The flag had been shaken clean. The service counter smelled of lemon soap instead of neglect. Nathan stood beneath the broken sign outside and listened to laughter drifting from the lobby. Not loud laughter, careful laughter. The kind people make when hope has entered the room, but nobody wants to scare it off. Ruth came to stand beside him. Grace always said this place still had bones. Nathan looked through the window at strangers becoming something less strange. I thought I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Ruth smiled gently. Maybe that's how most good things start. Atlas leaned against Nathan's leg, warm and solid in the cooling September air. Behind them, the old station no longer looked abandoned. It looked embarrassed by how loved it was becoming. The offer arrived in an envelope so clean it looked insulting on the old service counter. Heavy white paper, raised blue logo. Nathan Cole printed in a font that seemed too elegant for a building whose front steps still held yesterday's sawdust. Ruth found it when she came in with coffee, biscuits, and a look that said she had already decided the letter was bad news before anyone opened it. Atlas sniffed the envelope once, then sneezed as if even the paper had lied to him. Nathan slid a thumb beneath the flap. Inside was a purchase proposal from Brighton Land Group for the property at 19 Alder Street. $75,000, cash closing, no repair obligations, no further involvement required. The number sat on the page like a door swinging open. Nathan read it once, then read it again because poverty trains a man not to trust rescue when it arrives wearing a necktie. $75,000 would pay the motel debt, repair the Ranger properly, cover Atlas's medication for years, maybe even put Nathan in a small apartment where the walls did not smell like damp carpet and other people's bad nights. It was not wealth. But to a man who had counted gas money in coins 3 days earlier, it felt close enough to miracle to be dangerous. Ruth did not reach for the letter. How much, she asked. Nathan told her. She closed her eyes for half a second. They came higher than I thought. You knew they'd offer? People like that prefer checks to questions. Evelyn arrived an hour later and read the proposal without sitting down. Her mouth tightened at the clause requiring all materials, records, fixtures, and contents remaining on site to transfer with the property. They don't just want the building, she said. They want whatever your father and mine kept inside it. Nathan looked toward the hallway that led to the hidden room. The station had been noisy all morning with work. Walt sanding a rail, Joanne replacing a hinge, Alma washing old file labels from cabinet drawers. Now somehow the place felt quiet again. By noon, Martin Vale arrived in person. He parked a silver SUV along Alder Street and stepped out wearing a navy suit light enough for Tennessee heat, polished shoes, and a smile built for boardrooms and ribbon cuttings. He was in his early 50s, handsome in a careful way, with silver at the temples and eyes that never rested long enough to be warm. "Mr. Cole," he said, offering his hand. "First, let me say, as a veteran, you have our deepest respect." Nathan shook his hand because refusing would have made the man too important. Martin glanced at Atlas. Beautiful dog. Atlas stared back, unimpressed. Inside the lobby, Martin moved slowly, taking in the cleaned windows, the repaired counter, the people working in the back. "This is admirable," he said, "truly. But old buildings can become emotional traps. They ask too much from people who have already given enough." The words were soft. That was what made them sharp. He placed a cashier's check on the counter, already prepared. "You deserve a clean start, no permits, no hearings. No more sleeping in a police station that should have been torn down years ago." Nathan looked at the check. The amount seemed larger handwritten than it had on the proposal. Martin lowered his voice. "Mercy Ridge needs progress, jobs, tax revenue, a grocery store that isn't 30 minutes away. You don't want to stand in the way of that because of a few old stories. A few old stories." Nathan felt the phrase settle over the room like dust trying to return. He thought of the jars downstairs, the names on labels, his father's notebook, Sheriff Parker's voice saying people the town had taught itself not to see. He thought of motel rooms, unpaid bills, Atlas's stiff hip, his own empty bank account. The truth was he wanted the check. Wanting it shamed him, which made him want it more. That evening, after Martin left the offer on the counter and the volunteers drifted home, Nathan sat alone in the chief's office. The building held the day's warmth in its bricks. Outside, crickets stitched sound into the dark. Atlas slept near the desk until Nathan unfolded the check again. Then the shepherd rose, crossed the room, and placed one paw gently on Grace Cole's notebook. Not hard, not trained, just enough. Nathan stared at the paw, then at the sentence his father had written. "Don't let them call people debris." He sat there a long time. No music swelled, no thunder rolled. Just a tired man, an old dog, and a piece of paper that could make his life easier if he agreed to make other people's lives disappear more quietly. At last Nathan picked up the check and slid it back into the envelope. He did not tear it. He did not make a speech to the walls. He simply locked it in the desk drawer and placed his father's notebook on top. "Not tonight," he whispered. Atlas rested his head against Nathan's knee. Outside, across the street, the Blue Lantern sign glowed softly in the dark, a small blue light refusing to go out. The town meeting was held in the old Mercy Ridge Courthouse, a square brick building with tall windows, worn wooden floors, and ceiling fans that turned slowly as if they were stirring up ghosts instead of air. By 6:30, every bench was filled. Retired mill workers sat beside shop owners, county clerks beside church volunteers, men in work shirts beside women with purses held tight in their laps. No one spoke loudly. The room carried the strange quiet of a place where people had come not because they were certain, but because they were tired of pretending uncertainty was the same as peace. Nathan stood near the front, with Evelyn Parker on one side and Atlas on the other. The German shepherd lay at his feet, calm but awake, his gray muzzle resting between his paws, his eyes fixed on the room as if he understood that some battles were fought with paper, memory, and the courage to stay seated when truth became uncomfortable. Across the aisle, Martin Vale sat with two representatives from Brighton Land Group. He looked composed, sympathetic, almost bored. That bothered Nathan more than arrogance would have. Arrogance admitted it wanted something. Politeness could hide a whole landfill beneath fresh sod. The council chairman began with procedural language: redevelopment review, structural concern, economic opportunity, public comment. Words moved across the room, clean and dry, stripped of fingerprints. Then Evelyn stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She placed the first map on the easel, then the second, then the third. "This is Alder Creek," she said. "This is the old mill drainage route. These are the well complaints filed between 2017 and 2019. These parcels were later purchased through companies now connected to Brighton Land Group. A murmur moved through the benches. Nathan watched faces change slowly, not from shock but from recognition. Some people had known pieces. Nobody had wanted the whole picture. Evelyn continued with the patience of someone laying stones across deep water. She presented lab requests, county receipts, property transfers, Grace Cole's pump notes, and the newly tested samples Nathan had driven to Knoxville himself. The results were not dramatic in the way movies taught people to expect. No single page shouted. Together, they spoke with the steady insistence of rain finding a roof leak. Then Evelyn turned on the cassette recorder. Sheriff Harold Parker's voice filled the courthouse. Thin with age, steady with resolve. We were not trying to save a building. We were trying to save the people the town had taught itself not to see. No one moved. Even the ceiling fans seemed quieter. Nathan felt those words pass through the room and settle where polite language could no longer reach. After the tape ended, the chairman cleared his throat, but before he could speak, Ruth Bell stood from the second row. "My sister lived off Mill Road," she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "Her water turned brown after every hard rain. We were told old pipes. We were told country wells did that. We were told not to make trouble." Another person stood. Then another. A former mill mechanic. A retired nurse. A man who had spent 20 years repairing roofs and had never once complained in public until that night. They did not accuse with fury. They testified with exhaustion. Each voice added weight, not noise. Nathan listened until something inside him shifted. He had come to Mercy Ridge thinking he was the one who needed a place to stand. Now he saw the room was full of people who had been standing alone for years. When his turn came, he walked to the front carrying his father's notebook. Atlas rose and followed, stopping beside him without command. Nathan looked at the council, then at the benches, then at the back wall where the town seal hung polished and untouched. In the service, he said, "We had a phrase people like to repeat, 'Leave no one behind.' It sounds noble. It is noble. But it is also practical. You do not leave someone behind because the moment you decide one person is disposable, everybody becomes negotiable." His hand tightened around the notebook. "When I came home, I learned people can be left behind very quietly, through paperwork, through delays, through meetings where nobody says the cruel thing out loud, but everybody votes for it anyway. My father wrote something before he died. He wrote, 'Don't let them call people debris.' That is what this is about, not a police station, not one creek, not one company. It is about whether a town can look at the people with the least money, the least influence, the quietest voices, and still say, 'You matter enough for us to tell the truth.'" The room stayed silent. Martin Vale looked down at his folded hands. For the first time, his polish seemed small. The council did not vote to demolish that night. They voted to suspend redevelopment, open an environmental review, preserve 19 Alder Street pending investigation, and enter the Parker Cole records into public archive. It was not a victory with cheering. It was something better. The first honest breath after years in a closed room. Outside, under the courthouse lamps, people gathered around Nathan without crowding him. Ruth touched his arm. Evelyn wiped her glasses, though they were not dirty. Atlas leaned against Nathan's leg, tired but steady. Across the square, the old station waited in the dark, no longer a secret, no longer silent. 1 year later, the sign above 19 Alder Street no longer looked like something surviving out of habit. The rust had been sanded away, the missing letters replaced, the brick washed clean but not made new. Nathan had insisted on that. Some scars deserved air and sunlight, not paint thick enough to pretend nothing had happened. Beneath the old words Mercy Ridge Police Department, a second sign now hung in warm black lettering, the Atlas House, Community Resource Center. The building opened every morning at 7, because old habits were hard to break, and because Atlas, now 9 and grayer through the face, still believed doors existed to be watched. He lay just inside the entrance on a braided rug Ruth Bell had donated, lifting his head for every visitor with the calm authority of a creature who had seen people at their worst and chosen, again and again, to expect better. The lobby smelled different now. Coffee, lemon oil, sawdust, paper, and sometimes tomato soup from the kitchenette in back. The service counter where complaints had once been filed now held resource forms, job postings, bus schedules, repair request cards, and a chipped blue bowl full of peppermint candies. The old holding cells had been cleaned, unlocked, and transformed into a tool library. Hammers hung where keys once hung, paint rollers, extension cords, pipe wrenches, garden shears, all labeled in Joanne Tate's square handwriting. The former interview room had become a quiet counseling office with 2 chairs, soft lamps, and a framed print of Alder Creek after the cleanup began. The chief's office stayed mostly as it had been, except the dust was gone. Grace Cole's notebook sat in a glass case beside Sheriff Harold Parker's badge, not as relics of men who failed, but as proof that delayed courage was still courage if someone finally carried it forward. Nathan moved through the building with a mug of coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other, wearing jeans, work boots, and a blue chambray shirt with sawdust at the cuffs. He looked healthier than he had a year ago, though not magically healed. Real healing did not arrive like sunrise in a hymn. It came more like weather stripping a drafty door, patient, plain, almost invisible, until one day the room held warmth. He still had quiet mornings when grief sat beside him before coffee. He still reached for his phone sometimes to call his father, forgetting for half a breath that the number no longer reached anywhere. But now those moments had somewhere to land. A man came in needing help filling out a benefits form. A retired seamstress brought donated curtains for the meeting room. Ruth argued gently with Walt about whether the porch rail should be painted blue or left natural. Evelyn Parker arrived every Thursday to review documents for anyone who could not afford an attorney, placing her briefcase on the same counter where her father's warnings had once been ignored. Nobody called it charity. Nathan would not allow that word to settle in the place. Charity looks down, he said whenever a donor tried to make the work sound noble. Respect sits beside. That sentence became something of a rule. It was painted near the back door above the coffee maker, right under another line chosen by Ruth. No person is a problem to be processed. Every person is a story to be respected. The environmental investigation had not fixed everything. No honest story ended by pretending a town could wash 30 years clean in 12 months. But the creek banks were fenced off, new testing wells were installed, and Brighton Land Group had withdrawn its redevelopment claim after the state opened formal review. More importantly, Mercy Ridge had learned to say names out loud. At the dedication ceremony, Nathan did not give a grand speech. He stood on the front steps with Atlas leaning against his leg and looked out at faces he had once passed as strangers. "My father bought this place for $10, he said. I thought that was the value of the building. Turns out it was just the price. The value was what people were willing to remember." Then he stepped aside, because the story no longer belonged only to him. That evening, after the last chair was folded and the last coffee pot washed, Nathan locked the front door but did not leave right away. Sunset lay over Alder Street in copper light. The blue lantern sign flickered on across the square. Atlas stood beside him, slower now, but steady. Nathan took the brass key from his pocket. He still carried it every day, though the lock had long since been replaced. At first, he had thought the key opened a dead building. Later, he thought it opened his father's past. Now he knew better. It had opened a question. What do we owe people when nobody important is watching? Nathan looked through the clean glass at the warm rooms inside, the tool library, the counseling office, the archive, the coffee counter, the old cells remade into usefulness. He saw no miracle there, only work, only hands. Only proof that broken things could become honorable if people stopped calling them worthless. Atlas gave a soft sigh and leaned his weight into Nathan's leg. Nathan smiled, tired and full-hearted. "Ready to go home, old man?" The dog looked up as if the answer had been obvious for a year. Nathan locked the door, touched the sign once, and walked down Alder Street beneath the first stars of evening. Behind him, the Atlas house stood bright in the window light. No longer abandoned, no longer ashamed, no longer silent. And in Mercy Ridge, a town that had once taught itself not to see, people had begun learning the harder, holier work of looking at one another again. If this story reminded you that no one deserves to be forgotten, take a second to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you most? And where are you watching from tonight?